It is Monday, March 8th, and this is the memory group meeting. There are quite a few non-verbalized updates there everybody can read. Before we jump into the boards, so there's lots of requests still for what our results are from running GitLab in a memory constrained environment. So let's try and wrap those up this week if at all possible. I know we have the documentation started for how to configure the memory constrained environment. I think the big unknown is measuring memory on a small instance with 2 gigs of RAM. I don't think that's assigned to anybody. If I remember right, maybe Alexi was going to look into that, but we can take this comment async, see if we can finish this up this week. And if not, definitely this milestone, because there's a lot of interest in both of those topics. Any questions on that part? All right. Jump over to the build board real quick and run through what we can. Nicola, you got the first one?
Yeah, so this is done, like all the measurement is completed and the blueprint is updated with the results. So we're good to go.
Awesome. Hey, Fabian's here. So I read through Matthias' issue here. It looks like the M-advise settings were all rolled out. And you can read the thread if you want. This one, it looked like it went all the way to production. Camille, do you know if this one's done?
M-advise, I think like it's rolled out.
No, the next one, sorry. The instrument or optimistic locking framework with logging on Prometheus.
I would have to check out the. Can you give me that link? I will tell you quickly because like actually no, just click it. Optimistic logging. Okay, we merged Prometheus histogram log metrics. I did not check the Prometheus histogram log metric, but it's working. Like the ELK match logs to work. So I would assume that it's just fine to close it now.
Okay.
As being done.
All right, and then ran through in dev this morning. So there are still a few MRs open on optimizing JE Malloc and garbage collection on GitLab. Nicola, Sidekick to use read-only.
This in development, actually, I almost finished it. Like I'm now like trying to find a way how to test it. That's a big question. I don't know, Camille, if you have any suggestion, like, and I think I will move it to review today, so you can take a look what I did. Am I going to the right direction here?
Sorry, can you say again? Like what?
Yeah, sorry. Do you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So I almost finished like development here, but I'm not sure how to test it.
For Sidekick, right? Cool. Just assign to me and I will like look how it looks. But how to test it? I will look how you do it, how you did it. But probably like you need to have the load balancing configured locally.
I already did it, but I'm not sure how to make like the secondary replica to be late or something. So maybe I'll ping you.
Like with the replication lock, right?
Yeah.
It's like that. It may be slightly hard because you would have to configure Postgres to replicate. Maybe we should like ask database team to guide us on like if we want to test like the like this replication log and how we would be able to test it.
Yeah, that's good. Good suggestion.
I mean, like one challenge is like that you also need to create a delay, so you kind of have to figure out a way to make it more like the archive type of the approach. Like you create a snapshot, it has like a lot of delay, and you kind of then sync at some point. I would ask database team. I just don't know a lot about how to. your replicas.
I'll post a question in their channel, but I saw that Stan did it locally for some other issue that he was able to like set it up. So
Yeah, so
helping
if
him.
you would do it, I would happily read the development documentation how to do it.
Yeah, it's not easy thing to do. Or we can like push it and enable feature flag and see if it's working. If it works.
It might work.
Okay.
But let me refrain from approving or disapproving that at that moment.
Yeah.
The recorded meeting.
Oh yes, we are recording. Sorry.
I can edit that part out. It's fine.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Camille, you have the next two.
Yes, I'm gonna push like this updated developer documentation today because it's pretty much done. I only have some copyright changes to the technical writer, so it will be finished. And then I'm just gonna finish on the second one, work on the second one. But it's gonna be like later this week.
Okay. Is anybody working on this one? I thought that had been assigned at one point in time.
Matthias worked on that initially for the metadata, and like metadata is being solved, but we didn't solve the environments yet. So I guess like on the last meeting, it was like that maybe Darby assigned someone to that. But if you would, Craig, find someone like interested from our group, I think we could also like tackle that.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
I mean, there are some ways like how to approach it. I tried initially, but I think if you would follow the suggestion of mine of batch loader, which is like designed for this kind of purpose, it should be pretty fine.
Okay.
So I guess like it's more like an understanding who can like tackle that and where it's like the spare capacity.
All right, I'm gonna move it out of in-dev and put it under that one. All right. Does anybody know what's going on with this one?
This one we talked on Friday, and I think like I suggested that like it kind of requires like a full rewrite this worker, I mean the service, and it requires a ton of database, domain knowledge. And since we're gonna have someone from the security group, I think Darby or someone from the security, one of the security managers gonna basically assign it to someone from security group to basically could completely rewrite it.
Okay.
I think like the outcome was like that Matthias made the Prio 1 on that because he measured that it's like 40% of the SQL load on the primary going from the side key. So it seems like pretty big sync.
Okay, I will add both of those to the rapid action agenda. Make sure we find an owner for them. I'm sorry, this one is going to stay with us, so I'll make sure the other one we find an owner for it. And then seg fault on Jason Jim.
Yeah, so we like it turned out that there is like another same problem with the compact. There is another Ruby extension that it's failing. So Alexi asked SRE what to do, but they basically like what they did in the end, they rolled out our Nokayashi GC changes, and Alexi gonna work on disabling GC compaction or disabling Nokayashi GC. It will turn out like what we do, but it's actually like this is the summary of what we're gonna do. It appears that like GC compact being used still causes us problems because some of the gems are not properly handled with that. So we may just like be premature on using compact on 2.7. 3.0 has some improvements for the compaction. They're gonna that allows to shuffle references and like much easier to catch this type of errors. But for the time being, like we kind of agreed that like third time charm kind of thing, and like we don't want to break third time. So I mean, like the truth is like these 6 efforts that go unnoticed for pretty much over 2 weeks, because like we merged and enabled it like 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of did run the pop-up, so it was completely random that did it pop up. So I guess like the severity of that was like pretty minimal, because it didn't cause like any noticeable impact, but it's like a Ruby crash. So we decided to be on safe side and roll back the compact, but keep likely the rest of the Nokayashi changes.
Okay, thank you. All right, and yep, so ready for development. I moved the measure memory on a small instance to the top. So if people come up looking for work, that's next. Get the validation board. Nothing new there. Question maybe for Fabian or Giannis. This came up on the memory team triage issue, and I couldn't remember what label we're using now, but this is most certainly not a feature. What's the tech debt or backend label that we're using?
I think there's a technical debt item issue label. I think it's already labeled that, right? Actually,
it is.
Gray one at the bottom.
Yep. All right. I got rid of the feature. Okay. And then Fabian, you want to run through this real quick? I talked about these a little bit, but is there any more detail you want to add to this, where the request coming from?
Sorry, I was a bit late in the beginning. I think the main ask here is really to say, okay, let's finish the documentation for all of the settings that we recommend in a constrained environment. And then there are essentially 2 follow-ups to this. I think would be great if we could attribute memory impact per change, right? For example, the Puma single, right? There's a range of how much it can do, but I think it would also be very impactful to have a simple measurement saying, okay, you know, like in GitLab 13.7, none of these changes were around, right? Or maybe even within the version, like latest version of GitLab 13.10, right, uses X amounts of memory, you change these settings, this is probably going to cause a reduction of around that, right? I think that will be really helpful because it will wrap this up nicely, and it will be a good first iteration, and it will also show the impact of the work that we've made. So that's, I think, the general idea. Yeah, I think the ask here is really, it would be good if we could finish this, you know, in the next week or so, just because I think we should wrap this up. And also there's the desire to understand what impact we've made from sort of the product side, and it would be super helpful, quite frankly, for me to have that.
Thank you. All right, Camille, you got the last item on the agenda here.
Yes, so I make it like ready. I'm actually also wrote a message on the backend channel about that proposal, and I also assigned Gary to this proposal, or not yet. Actually, I assigned, but I should make it reviewer. Assign reviewer Gary. So what else I can say? Like, let's keep rolling. I'm just kind of like interested about the next steps.
Yeah, that's great.
else I can say? Thank you, Nicola. Without you, it would be not possible.
Thank you for the support and everything.
That's it on the agenda. Anything else folks want to cover today?
Yeah, just a small one. I'm currently working on building a reference architecture with Kubernetes running Puma, essentially. Well, that's the only bit that's relevant to this group. Through my testing, I found that it wasn't performing to the same kind of spec as the normal 10K environment would do with Puma running on Rails. Yeah, and in Rails VMs. What I noticed is that eventually increasing the pods just stopped working at some point. It just didn't really. It seemed to hit like a ceiling, so to speak. But then these pods were set up in that they were both 2 core boxes with 2 Puma workers. I noticed initially that we were quite a bit underneath the worker count compared to the normal 10K, so I increased that. That made a slight improvement, not as much as I expected. And then I added more after that, and it still did nothing. But when I changed the pods over to 4 core boxes with 4 workers instead, that actually then started to improve again. So I thought that was quite interesting to see that Puma just perform better in bigger pods, so to speak, with more cores, even though there's more workers on that same container, so to speak. So I don't know if there's an issue there yet. I'm still testing out and trying things out, but certainly I think in the Kubernetes world, ideally you want the pods to be as small as possible. So if a pod dies, it doesn't affect overall performance too much. So at the moment, I think I'm going to have to go 4 core. I'll probably get pushback from the distribution team about that because they want pods to be as small as possible. So it's a bit of a weird balancing act. But it's just giving you a highlight. I think the team might have been tagged on the issue that I'm reviewing this on. If you want to have a look, feel free, but it's a lot of numbers in there now as I'm testing stuff. But once I have more data, I'll probably come back and let you know. But I feel there might be some kind of weird issue there, or maybe just an inherent restriction running Puma on such small pods and expecting the same performance. I don't know.
Thanks, Grant.
Just an FYI.
Yeah, and I remember reading through that issue. So you did tag the memory group on that one. So.
Yep.
Question just came to mind. So Camille, if we merge the composable code base, and I haven't, apologies if it's answered in the blueprint, but what's the first step? Like if we start taking on that work, is it broken down into like order of operations on what we should do first? You're on mute.
I think the first step gonna be really like making what Nicola does POC and create iterations and epic, and like what is like the important features that we want to like develop in this model. Because I think like my perception, if we would move that into that model, we would need to kind of I don't know like where to start. There is a lot of aspects how we want to tackle that. But I'm kind of thinking that like what I would really want to achieve in the end goal is that like all the GitLab code base that it's loaded, it's explicit, it has explicit context. So I would even say, kind of going even further than what Nicola did, that would maybe introduce the GitLab core engine, which is like the main engine that all the code lands by default, that would define the GitLab core would also be loaded to kind of prevent loading everything in the single, like the big namespace. But this is something like to kind of still discuss on how to approach, because I think like my perceptions is like, it would be awesome if we could get rid of these top level directories from which we load the GitLab code base. This would be kind of like my expectation. I would rather say that we should maybe have engines, GitLab, engine/GitLab core, engine/GitLab web, engine/ whatever else we may need, And this is where the code base of the GitLab lives. But also like this is like multi-step process, how to move things like in very small increment while we do it. So we would need to kind of really spend some time on figuring out the order of the operations that Nicola did with this very big chunky amount of the work, because we're not gonna move, I don't know, 3,000 files in a single go because it's gonna create a lot of configs. So we need to figure out a way how to do it like iteratively.
Yep.
I mean, move more and more pieces, add up to that. So maybe we just kind of, the first iteration would be defined. Let's create engines folder. Let's create this shallow engines GitLab core site key web. Let's create kind of like skeleton for everything and kind of start then slowly moving things into these engines. And also kind of discovering the dependencies of the given component that we will be moving. Because like what Nicola did, he kind of like looked and took up GraphQL. I'm just gonna move everything into that context.
Right.
But Ruby is fully dynamic language. And if we somehow could also understand that app GraphQL depends on a class that it's only used in the GraphQL context from the lib folder, it would be super great if you could also move this lib folder into this GitLab minus web. So kind of like trying to understand how we can untangle this messy lib folder that we have today that has like kind of cross dependencies everywhere, creating like bidirectional dependency between active record model and like the implementation itself, and then across other libs and other gems and things like that. So
yeah, untangling the lib folder is real challenge.
so I guess like probably starting with like figuring out the iteration, maybe starting with the skeleton, then kind of trying to understand what are the lowest pieces that we can move like one by one until like we get to the state that we moved everything that we wanted. But also I guess like the GraphQL example is intriguing because of these pops up notifications. So I guess it would also impact the action cable work and the GraphQL work. And we also have GraphQL architecture blueprint. So I'm kind of thinking there's like a lot of steps, a lot of coordination on doing that.
Yep. Okay, thank you. That's a great
Sorry,
overview.
it's kind of messy, but it's really like the messy topic how to really approach that. I mean, like POC, how it is done, it like shows the end story, but like from like making POC production ready, it's yet another story. And like if I would estimate the effort of the POC, like probably multiply that by 3 to 5, the effort on making POC production ready, which is like yet significantly more iterations to make.
Understood. Yeah, it's quite complicated, and I think in the brief conversations I've had with Jerry on the topic, he understands that this is going to take a while to find the right first iteration to test on this. So, but thank you for that overview. It's very helpful.
I'm kind of thinking that like creating skeleton may be truly the most important aspect, because maybe from that skeleton, if you would have a completely new component adding, I don't know, some kind of completely new API for service that is not internal part of the GitLab REST API or whatever else, I would kind of advise that it kind of goes into separate engine. It kind of create additional application layer. So I don't have like anything of the example today of such, but they're gonna be likely be example at some point. And I know that we are talking about, for example, the CI runners. So maybe CI would kind of follow that pattern with the API of using the dedicated engine for that purpose, like kind of containing all of that services, logic, and whatever else is needed. So maybe something along these lines. But I think like skeleton is probably like the most important aspect, like to ship, to provide like a way how the skeleton should be defined and how the data flow between the skeletons should look like. And this is also like what we talked with Gary about, that it's gonna impose slightly different data sharing model, because like today you would share data through the code base. I mean, you would share side key to controller, maybe like calling exactly the same code that would be called in the web, in the side key process. But this would impose the kind of maybe even like going outside. If you want to fetch like the GraphQL, you should use API, because the GraphQL infrastructure gonna be scaled separately to the side key, and the side key doesn't really need the GraphQL. So it would also define like the data flow model. It would slightly change data flow, because it would limit you exactly what you can run in the given context and how you want to share data. I mean, you would still have the same principles of sharing data through Redis and through database, how you do today with the models, but you would not have the method of like sharing data. I'm just gonna call this very complex GraphQL resolver to generate a JSON payload or whatever else in the side key. This kind of thing would be impossible. We would require that like you have to call API on the web process to actually to perform this kind of operation. It would also imply that there is some aspect with the logging and tracing that. I guess there's like a lot of queries to solve that we don't really think about them today, because we don't have these problems of the single big monolithic code base. But in the more like microservices world, you would rather use API than re-implement a wheel in your process. I mean, sometimes you're gonna re-implement a wheel, but I think this is not something that we should be worried about in this context, because you still share the code base. You can still share the code if you want to like share something between web and side key. You would still have that ability. You would just move that into more a core context to reuse the code. So I mean, we would still not disallow that, but we would kind of change a default approach to slightly different.
Fabian, you unmuted a couple times. Did you have something you wanted to say or ask?
Yeah, no, I think I have to read this in more detail, but you know, in order to avoid making unqualified comments. But I think my like we talked about that last week, with very large changes like this, I think it will be the most important aspect on, you know, how we enable others to actually do this, you know, when they understand it's important. Because I think otherwise it will take forever and we'll own this gigantic surface area and won't be able to actually do much about it. So I think this is what Camille refers to as the skeleton, right? Like giving other people in other teams the ability to sort of understand, you know, and then do it themselves with our support maybe is, I think, the only way I can see something like that happening, you know, sort of relatively swiftly, even though it will still take a long time. So that's my main concern, because it opens a bucket of, let's say, a rather sizable bucket, if I understand correctly.
Yes.
Yes, Fabian, like we're not gonna do all of that on our own. So I'm kind of like also talk with Craig that if this is becoming so important, maybe we have this database scalability group that is focusing on that particular aspect. And this is one of these many long-term architectural improvements. So maybe this would also require this kind of like more multi-team approach
Definitely.
to tackling that, because like I think like it's unreasonable to expect that we're gonna do everything, because like the code base is constantly changing, and like we're not gonna do everything. Someone gonna add so much new code that we're not gonna able to handle. So I'm kind of thinking like that if this is our like way to tackle the big monolith, this should probably be also more formalized at some point. But I would kind of like wait for that as soon as we have like much wider agreement that this is the approach.
Yeah, and so the kickoff is Wednesday. I don't expect a lot of decisions to be made at that point in time. It'll be an overview, like Jerry's ideas, and then maybe we get into the composable code base idea. But Camille, what you described is what I assumed the approach was going to be, and you added a lot more detail than I had at the time. So thank you. Yes, I think there will be, like, the skeleton's a great example, and maybe we find the smallest possible implementation so we have an example for other teams to follow along with, and then we can demonstrate and probably give teams some ideas like, hey, this would be a great place to do, I'm not even sure what to call this, your own engine, your own folder. This would be a great place to migrate it and get us some scalability so that, again, we can farm this out to other teams and they can own it going forward. And maybe from a product management standpoint, Giannis or Fabian, you all know of some new endpoints that are being created that in the near future that we could consider for this new construct that Camille has come up with.
Yeah. I mean, I think the reality is that this is, by the way, a more general scaling challenge. Mm-hmm. Nobody knows anything. Things just happen, right? And then essentially the pattern is more, oh, this just happened, and that impacts 5 other areas, and then you scramble to get it done, right? And I think if we have docs to at least point to and say like, hey, you should do it this way, or then that helps already tremendously. But I would state a wrong. But yeah, it would be wrong to say that this is totally under control, right? I get regularly surprised by things that are happening.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. It's a great overview. Thanks for your work, Camille and Nicola, on this. I'm excited to get the working group kicked off on Wednesday. It'll be fun. All right. If there's nothing else, I'll let everybody have some time back. And happy Monday.
Happy Monday.